away from me.
Good, not the lady
About
with the
5 months ago, during this whole thing, I just said something and, whew, it was incendiary, you know, I mean, she just went off. And for a while, I thought very seriously about maybe not going back. You know, I really don't need to do that to myself. I don't really need to put myself in that position. And I decided against it. And I have been going, and I'm going again tomorrow, you know. But yeah, we kind of stay away from certain issues, but we can respect each other as human beings. And you know, maybe there will come a time that we can talk about some of these things again.
Big thing. You don't have to find somebody else's views acceptable, right? When people tell me that gay people are not people and they're disgusting and they sin, right? I don't really generally like hearing that, right?
People say that?
Yeah, oh yeah. Oh yeah, all the time. I've been called faggot under my breath. I've had people whip shit at me. Oh yeah, like, because I have my nails on or whoever I'm, me, right? Oh yeah, right? Because you're privileged in the way that generally doesn't happen with the straight identity, right? So the idea there is I don't have to find your views acceptable, but I will listen to you because I want them to be understandable. Still won't think they're acceptable, but it'll make more sense to me if I can understand that you did come from a different time, right? Like my grandfather, crazy racist. He came from Mobile, Alabama in the 1930s, right? Not, right? So, not cute. But the things that I'm not cute, right? But I try my damnedest to say, okay, well, he comes, first of all, 1930s was just terrible. Because we're gearing up for World War II and everything was crazy racist, but not. The Great Depression had just happened. It was just very, very different time, right? So if you can make room for that and make room for the understanding of these beliefs, I think the other person on the other side of the conversation is going to be more likely to see and understand you and your beliefs, right? So I have found, you know, I debate online all the time. I ran for office. I live for this stuff. And I've gotten a lot better at debating over the years. When I was a kid, when I was 16, 17, you know, I used to be, that was that gay. I was that kid who would like freak out and be like, how dare you don't know my life, you don't know anything about me. But I was that person. But now what I try to do, and it's hard, it is really hard, right? Is I try to say, that's interesting, right? Because it's me telling them that I don't necessarily agree with what they say, but it's also me opening the door that I will listen.
Yeah.
I'm not going to agree with you. You're not going to change my mind that black people are less than or gays shouldn't be married. Like, you're not going to change my mind on these things. But I don't need to change your mind either if we can at least have a conversation that remains nonviolent. Right? So we see all this stuff happening into the nuts and bolts of how do we then intervene in these situations, right? How do you deal with the grandmother making an overtly racist remark, right? How do you deal with the kids in the chat room who say, you know, the diet racist things, like, I would never date a black guy, right? Like that stuff, right? Because we see that stuff a lot, right? I mean, in the gay community, it's no fats, no femmes, no Asians. Like, and they can't even see how that's really ridiculous, right? So as opposed to doing something where you just kind of sit back and into being the bystander, we want to kind of talk about how you can be an upstander, how you can be involved in that situation in a way that is really productive. So Jay is going to pass out a handout. We're going to go over the 2 pages, just 2 pages here. We want to go over kind of how we can intervene. And the first thing, before we even start talking about any of this, if the situation is violent, don't even bother, right? It's not, if it's violent, right, and you know, we talk about that, you know, in step 2 here, right? Safety is absolutely first, right? But you have to live under a rock to not see these situations, whether it be online, forums, video games, school, your classroom. You know, there's 1,000 places where this stuff can kind of take place. So the first step really is being able to find that courage within ourselves. That's why we have a group like this, so we can support ourselves to say, I want to be more than a bystander. I want to be an upstander. I want to get involved in this situation. But you can't do that without the courage to actually even step into a situation in the first place, right? So the bystander effect is this idea that, you know, 1,000 people are watching a house burn. No one calls the fire because everyone assumes someone else did, right? And that's exactly what we're kind of talking about here, is because, oh, well, somebody else will correct his racist behavior, or somebody else will kind of correct his hateful talk, but as you can see with this election, right, that is clearly not always the case. A lot of times we take the bystander approach, we step back, and we don't actually intervene at all. And then again, when you don't intervene, what happens is people speak for you, right? That's how this how our values tie into politics, because if you don't speak your values, then politicians and people who represent you are going to speak on your behalf, right? And they will get elected on other people, because remember, we don't have all the same perspectives. So some people really, I'm trying not to be political, it's really hard, right? So some people might think very differently from you, right? And the politician can turn to that person and be like, well, okay, you guys don't support me, but these guys over here do, right? So we see this. So we see this in our communities all the time. So the first part, right, of getting involved is you have to keep in mind safety, right? These things can turn ugly fast, right? Because when you're talking about identity politics, you're talking about how people view themselves, how they view their own self-esteem, how they're connected to their identities, how their identities connects them to broader communities. You're really talking about something really personal, right? So it's common and happens well more often than we want to admit that it can become violent. And if it's even remotely violent, when people start getting really deep into your face, when people like physical, right? That's the kind of, I love Jay, I'm not actually being violent with Jay. You know what I mean? But you can see those kind of signs. And if those are the signs that you're seeing in a situation, it is absolutely not worth it to engage that situation. Right? The situations that you want to engage is you want to try to gauge it to make sure that it's a calm enough situation that you yourself will be able to remain calm. But it's hard, right? It's really hard when I'm having a conversation with somebody who thinks that gay people shouldn't be able to get married, right? I think that's a ridiculous belief, but I want to hear you out. And the only way I can hear you out and the only way you can hear me out is if we stay calm and we engage the good sides of ourselves, right? And then we want to make sure too that you only speak from your perspective, right? A lot of people tend to get offended when you try to speak for somebody else, right? I try not to ever speak for the gay community at large, right? I am not the end all and be all of the gay community, but I have my own perspective as a person in the gay identity, with a gay identity.
But don't you feel that, as one of the few Jewish people in Fall River, people turn to me to give the Jewish perspective on everything.
It reminds me of
What
that.
do the Jews feel about it?
It's funny, right? It reminds me of guys talking about freedom writers earlier, right? There's a scene in Freedom Writers, that brilliant scene, like, why don't we get the black perspective? And they all look at the one black girl, and the girl's like, when did I become the spokesperson for all of people with the black identity? So you have to, again, that goes back to understanding their perspective, right? Because I get asked, and my staff, who I work with, they're adorable. They don't know things, right? They don't understand, the LGBT community the way I do. Again, I always tell them I don't speak for all gay people, but here's my idea, right? So when they ask me things along the lines of like gender identity, because they don't necessarily understand gender identity, I can't speak for all people who have differences in gender identity. I can speak from my perspective, right, within that community. And to know that every single community, nothing's the same. Not two Jewish people do not have the same perspective, right? Two Jewish people certainly can have the same perspective.
Jared.
And even within Judaism, right? How many different branches of Judaism are there, right? So even within identity, same thing with the gay identities, right? There are people who you would never know had a gay identity, and there are people who, like me, you can see it from space. So it's a matter of understanding that you can only speak from your perspective, right? You can speak from your perspective as a member of this community, but you do not speak for all members of that community, right? Because that's how we get into problems with scapegoating. That's how we get into problems with stereotyping, right? All blacks believe this, all gays do this, right? And all of that's nonsense, right? Because to say all or everybody of any one thing is usually false. Almost like 99.9% of the time I would say is false, right? If you want to say, oh, all people in Fall River are this. Guarantee you give me a day and a half, I can find some people in Fall River who would be different, right? So there's always that kind of going on. So, and what you can do, if you do want to have kind of a broader opinion of something or a broader perspective, ask others for help, right? There are other people who share your identity, and you can say, hey, as a member of this community, I've kind of felt like this. Is this something that you experience, being in the same community or even being in a different community that's also been traditionally marginalized, right? So the other really good important thing that's kind of on the rise are cameras, right? Courts, right, and all these things, you can't deny what you do and say on a video, right? Now, it's not always, again, that can lead to violence and stuff like that. Be like, I'm gonna record you, I'm putting it, right? Because I've seen that stuff online, been going around actually recently. There's a woman in a supermarket who was getting recorded and flipped out like, I'm gonna record your baby then. And it was,
Michael's right.
So this stuff-
And then the guy in the airplane.
so this stuff happens, right? So even, so understand that there are, always the three sides to every story, right? Your side, their side, and somewhere in the middle might be the truth, right? So cameras can be a helpful tool, but don't rely on them and don't bring them to a place of violence, because then that's just going back to the whole idea that you're making the situation unsafe that you shouldn't be in the first place. And then finally, so then what? So if the situation is under control, move away from the threat. Again, don't immerse yourself in anywhere that could be violent and anything that can kind of be something that could hurt your physical well-being or your mental well-being, right? Learn to step back from that. And then if people do want to learn how they can kind of intervene the way you did, because you can inspire somebody, right? They say over the course of your lifetime, the average person influences 5,000 to 10,000 people, right? Just in little ways. You let somebody go, and then the person behind you is inspired to let somebody else go, right? Little things that you don't even notice how your actions can kind of really inspire and really influence people. And then if it's really bad, and you're in a place, maybe at school, you're at something like that, report the incident. Right? Because a lot of times things can't be done, actions can't be taken to prevent anything if there's not a report of it. Right? So when I went to UMass Dartmouth, if I didn't make a report about the fact that people were calling me faggot every other day, right? The university can't quantifiably say that there was a problem with it, right? So it depends on the situation. I didn't personally report it. As I've grown older, I've kind of gotten good at washing it off my shoulders and making snide remarks like, oh, that's wicked clever and original, I've never heard that before, right? To diffuse it in my own way. So there's different ways you can approach it, as long as you are kind of making sure that you're safe and making sure that if the incident is getting really bad or really violent, that you do report it somewhere that you feel safe reporting, right? Whether it be to a guidance counselor, teacher you're comfortable with, an online moderator of something, whatever it may be, that you kind of pay attention to these things. So am I way off base with these things? Do you think make sense? Is this credible? Right? So the other thing we want to take a few minutes before we let you guys out of here is how to be an ally. So I studied history a lot in college, right? So